Hey y'all, so let's just go ahead and finish out this chapter tonight. We are talking about section 8.4 in your textbook. Again, it says 6.4 here, but that's from an older edition of the textbook. So we, of course, have been talking about human population, and even though we can see that some countries are declining in their population, overall, of course, the world population is growing, and it is growing still very rapidly. So the whole idea of this section of the chapter is how can we slow population growth? So I mentioned this, I think, yesterday in our lecture, but the key concept for this section of the chapter is that we can slow population growth by reducing poverty through economic development and also through elevating the status of women and encouraging family planning in these countries that have very high population growth. Of course, it's important to understand and just to be aware of when we have these conversations that slowing population growth, it can be a very controversial topic. And, in cases like China, for example, we know that they went to this very strict one-child policy that is extremely controversial, and there are people on both sides of the topic. So just when discussing it, it's important to keep in mind that we need to be sensitive to just where everyone stands on this issue. Okay, so I'm sure most of you at this point have looked at this slide or some sort of graph talking about the different demographic transition stages. You needed to do that for your homework last night and then also in class today. So I'm hoping you all sort of have an idea of what these are at this point. So demographers basically have developed this hypothesis on population change, and that is the demographic transition, right? So basically what demographic transition says is that as some countries or as countries become industrialized and more economically developed and their per capita income rises, poverty will decline, and there will be a shift from high birth rates to and death rates, but there will be a shift to a population that tends to grow more slowly. Okay, so I want you to notice that when we talk about the demographic transition here, your book actually has this same figure, but it splits stage 2 basically in half here. So your book actually talks about the 5 stages of demographic transition, and that would be the more current viewpoint that we'll be learning here. So here, 4 stages, but really now we say there are 5 stages of demographic transition. Okay, so stage 1 here is called pre-industrial. And this is where you have a population growing slowly because there are both high birth rates and high death rates, right? So high birth rates, but infant mortality is high, and there's not a lot of access to healthcare or nutrition. So, birth and death kind of match each other. So a population isn't growing very rapidly. Okay, but then we enter stage 2, which you could just imagine drawing a line right here. Stage 2. Okay, so actually you can see now I just went in and decided, I don't know how to get rid of that, but okay. So I just went ahead and separated stage 2. So actually stage 2 is this side of the line we're calling early transitional. So this is where you've had a country that is doing better economically. They have improved food production and more access to healthcare. And so death rates are declining. You can see the blue line here is the death rates going down, but still fairly high birth rates, or they're fairly steady. Okay, and then we're now going to call this late transitional, and this is what you're going to call stage 3, the late transitional. So late transitional, you still have rapid population growth, and I failed to mention that with stage 2, right? So stage 1, you have slow population growth, and stage 2, the early transitional, you start to see rapid population growth with these high birth rates and dropping death rates. Okay, so enter stage 3, the late transitional. You still are experiencing rapid population growth, but the red line here, birth rates are beginning to decline. This would be due to more family planning, and death rates are remaining low, okay, because we still have obviously access to healthcare. Okay, and also more nutrition because there's increased food production. Okay, so now don't call this stage 3, this is stage 4. It is still called the industrial stage. So population growth here is slowing as birth rates and death rates drop. Again, there is more improved food production, greater access to healthcare, and also higher levels of education, right? So we've talked about education can help with slowing down population growth. Just more education on family planning, but then of course, what's really important is education of women, right? And allowing them to perhaps enter the workforce more and delay having children, delay marriage, and subsequently delay having children. Okay, so now this we're calling stage 5, the post-industrial. So in the post-industrial demographic stage, you have populations leveling off here, you can see, and then they actually start to decline as birth rates, the population's declining. You can see here at first birth and death rates are fairly equal, and then you actually start having the birth rate fall below the death rate, right? So the population begins to decline, right? And so you can see this age structure diagram here illustrates a declining or a country that is in the post-industrial stage. So today, when you did that exercise in class, one of the countries was Germany. And so those of you who made or constructed the histogram for Germany found this sort of shape, which indicates a country that's entered this last stage, the post-industrial stage. Okay, so when we look at this and we think about countries, globally and where everyone is, that video that we watched, remember, said that most countries in the world are in stage 2, which would be either early transitional or late transitional. So what we're calling stage 2 or stage 3. Obviously, the more highly developed countries would mostly be in this industrialized stage, and some of them now entering the post-industrial stage. But most of the world's population falls in either early transitional or late transitional. And so a lot of analysts think that most of the world's least developed countries will make a demographic transition over the next few decades, and that this will basically occur because of newer technologies that help them to develop economically and also to reduce poverty. But some people actually worry that because of this rapid population growth that the least developed countries are experiencing, and because of extreme poverty found in these places, which oftentimes are experiencing conflict or war, and have a lot of environmental degradation that is only increasing, and depletion of natural resources, these some people are worried that these countries actually will just get stuck in this stage 2 with high population growth, and that they won't make the transition to the industrialized stage where population begins to slow. So some places that people are worried about that could be stuck in stage 2 with very high population growth are Afghanistan, Iraq, Guatemala, Pakistan, Yemen, Niger, and other African countries. Actually, Niger has the highest population growth worldwide right now. So really what they say is this just further highlights the need to work on reducing poverty, to improve overall human health, and to stabilize these populations. Okay, so moving on. Oops, hold on one second. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We have, let's see, did we talk about this? Yeah, so that's what we just talked about. So moving on, we're going to just talk about the whole idea of not just reducing poverty, but also of elevating the status of women. So basically, we've talked about the idea of trying to slow down population growth worldwide, and the concept of, really having to address the status of women in the world in order to do this. And so the idea being that less educated women have much more or many more children than more educated women, right? So when a woman is able to work outside, to earn her own money and to decide, make decisions about her own fertility, that this works to slow population growth. In general, women decide to have less children. Just some statistics that your book talks about. Only about 30% of girls in the world right now are enrolled in secondary education. In rural Africa, Latin America, and Asia, women do 60 to 80% of the work associated with growing food for their family or their village. Women and girls are the ones that haul the water, maybe miles a day. They gather wood for cooking and other needs. Women account for 66% of all hours worked in the world, but they only get 10% of the world's income. And in terms of land ownership, women in the world own just about 2% of the world's land. So moving on, women make up about 70% of the poor people in the world and 66% of the illiterate individuals in the world. And it has been shown that women who are illiterate often have an average of 5 to 7 children compared to literate women who have an average of 2 or less children in their lifetime. Okay, this is just a picture to illustrate the idea of women hauling, the firewood. I think in the United States, it's just hard for us to envision the women doing most of, the hard work in their village. Okay, and then this is just talking about family planning, working to reduce population growth and the benefits to family planning. So obviously with family planning, it reduces the number of unintended pregnancies. It can reduce population growth and rates of infant mortality, and also it reduces the number of women dying during pregnancy. Family planning also has financial benefits. It can save money in healthcare and education costs, as well as social service costs. Let's see, I don't need to say all that. It's estimated that 225 million women in the world, mostly in the world's poorest countries, have no access to basic family planning services. And if we could supply services to these women, it could reduce the projected global population size by 1 billion people, costing an average of only $25 per year per couple. All right, and then another statistic is that in the least developed countries in the world, 1 in 3 girls are married before the age of 18, and 1 in 9 before the age of 14. Okay, so when you have that happening, you have these girls really having, high numbers of children during their lifetime. And then, sorry, let me go back. So basically, just analysts want to increase family planning programs, and they really want to educate men about the importance of having fewer children, and educate men on taking more responsibility for the children that they do have. And it's been shown that, and this is an important idea, we've talked about the replacement level fertility. It's been shown that a country can either achieve or come very close to achieving the replacement level fertility, which would be 2.1 children. A country can do this within a decade or two. And some countries that have worked toward this are Japan, which we know now Japan is having the opposite problem, but Japan, Thailand, Bangladesh, South Korea, Taiwan, and China. Okay, so the next thing are these 2 case studies that your book talks about, which are population growth in India and China. And it is really important for you to know about what's going on in these places, because they're used over and over again as examples of very rapid population growth and the need to get this under control. So basically in 2015, as it says here, India had a population of 1.31 billion people, and there are a lot of problems associated with these large populations. So poverty, malnutrition, environmental degradation. There's a lot of different causes for rapid population growth in India and for this large population size. Most couples want to have a lot of children. There's a bias towards having male children. And only just under half of couples are using modern birth control methods. So this is India in 2010, and this is the projection for India in 2035. So the government in India has really been trying to control the population growth over the past 60 years. In 2017, the total fertility rate was 2.3. So that's really good. But the population has still been increasing, mostly due to declining death rates. And so projections show that India will be the most populous country in the world by the year 2029. You could just remember 2030. With probably about 1.7 billion people. Right now, India has the 4th largest economy in the world, and it has a really rapidly growing middle class with more than 100 million people. The country is facing severe poverty, as I said, malnutrition, environmental problems, and as the population grows to maybe 1.7 billion people, this will only get worse. Already about 1/3 of India's population lives in extreme poverty. 300 million people do not have access to electricity, and there are critical resource shortages and environmental problems. India has about 18% of the world's population, but actually only has access to 2.3% of the world's land resources and 2% of the world's forests. About half of their cropland has been degraded. through soil erosion and overgrazing. More than 2/3 of their water supply is considered seriously polluted. There's inadequate sanitation services, and in the major cities, there is very bad air pollution. But so with economic growth over, what's expected to happen with their economy and economic growth over the next few decades, is actually not expected to help with the problems, but actually put more pressure on their natural resources, because as per capita incomes rise, then resource use will actually go up with affluence. But while it might put more pressure with affluence on natural resources, economic growth might actually help to slow the population growth and accelerate the demographic transition to the next stage. Okay, so let's go on to population growth in China, and this will be the last thing that we talk about in this chapter. I know the video is getting long, and I'm doing my best to move through it. Right now, China is the world's most populous country. It is projected to peak at about 1.4 billion people by the year 2030, and then it's expected to decline to probably 1.3 billion people by the year 2050. So we've talked about, everyone knows about the one-child policy in China, which is now has been moved to a two-child policy. And so basically what happened is in the 1960s, there was a threat of mass starvation because of so many people in China and this rapid population growth they were experiencing. So the government established the world's strictest family planning and birth control program in 1978. Basically, couples who agreed to have no more than one child were given access to better housing. They were given more food, free health care. They were given salary bonuses and preferential job opportunities for their child when they grew up to working age and entered the labor force. If the family agreed to this, to have only one child and had access to all these incentives, and then they broke that and had more than one child, then they lost all the benefits. So to do this, the country provided contraceptives, but also sterilizations and other methods for controlling pregnancies for married couples. So between 1978, when they implemented this program, and 2017, China reduced its total fertility rate from 3 to 1.8. Here it says 1.7, but I have 1.8, but close enough. Okay, so it's great that China was able to reduce their fertility rate and get their population growth under control, but there have actually been a lot of negative effects of the one-child policy. Due to this policy, there's a lot more men now because that's what couples wanted, right? They wanted male children. And now with the skewed population, there's about 30 million Chinese men that cannot find anyone to marry. So that's a problem. And so also the age of the population is increasing. If you look at their age structure diagram, you see a lot of people, a large percentage of their population in that post-reproductive cohort. Between 1990 and 2010, the number of people living in extreme poverty decreased, which was great, right? It decreased by about 500 million people. There's been rapid industrialization in China since 1980. Their economy has become much improved, and there's been about 300 million people enter the middle class, right? So people that were living in poverty now have access to better opportunities. Their middle class has grown by about 300 million people, which is great. People are living better. But that means that they're consuming a lot more resources than they ever did. So there's been a huge strain on China's natural resources. And like India, they face serious soil erosion problems and overgrazing issues. And they have large problems with water pollution and air pollution, right? I think you've probably seen images of Beijing and the air pollution there and people walking around with masks on. There are days where they can't even go outside because the air is so bad. If you haven't seen that, we'll look at that some when we talk about specifically about air pollution. So it's thought by the year 2030, China will not have enough young workers. So in this 15 to 64 age group, and this means that they won't be able to support adequately the large aging population. So this could actually end up leading to a decline in the workforce with limited funds to support future economic development. And this may end up actually slowing China's economic growth in the long run. So in 2015, China was happy with where their population growth was and actually switched from the one-child policy to their now two-child policy. So it's allowing people to have, or they're giving incentive now. I think they're still giving the incentive to stick to a small family, but now for 2 children instead of 1, since they've gotten their population growth under control. Okay, so here's just what China's age structure diagram looked like in 2010. And you can see here projections for 2035. You have a much smaller cohort down at the pre-reproductive age and also the reproductive stage, and the post-reproductive stage is very large. Okay, so just wrapping up the chapter, the big idea is human population is growing very quickly, and that can cause environmental problems, and we might soon be meeting some tipping points and environmental limits. A combination of population growth and increasing resource use, or increasing the human ecological footprint, which is straining Earth's natural capital, or the resources that we rely on and all those ecosystem services. All right, so, and the last big idea is that we can slow human population growth if we reduce poverty, if we elevate women, and if we encourage family planning. Okay, so that's it. Tomorrow we will review. We'll talk about the histograms that y'all made today with the age structure diagrams, and that will be it. And we will have a test on Tuesday. I will see y'all tomorrow. Bye.